But it's more satisfying when you get to the end of an explanation than that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying, and abracadabra, God did it.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here for this one, because this is a conversation that does not happen at this level very often. We have Peter Atkins, one of the most respected chemists to ever come out of Oxford University, and one of the most outspoken atheist voices in academic debate, sitting across from John Lennox, a mathematician and philosopher of science who has spent his entire career arguing that faith and reason are not enemies but partners. And the question they are wrestling with tonight is one of the biggest ones a human being can ask. Can science explain absolutely everything, or is there something it fundamentally cannot reach? What makes this one worth watching all the way through is that both of these men are operating at the highest level. And there is a moment in this debate where things get sharp in a way that I genuinely did not expect. You're going to want to be here for that. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. It genuinely never gets old seeing how far this community reaches. All right, let's get into it.
Well, there's so much nonsense to hack away from.
This may be the phrase of the evening, yes.
Yeah. Let's go to what you called the core of your approach, which is the resurrection of Jesus. Never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true. And so let's dismiss that as something that simply has no evidence whatsoever of any credible
Before we
nature.
dismiss it, let's hear a response from John, because obviously this is an important issue. What counts as evidence and what are the assumptions we make?
I suppose you would argue that science cannot explain the resurrection.
Well,
I wouldn't quite argue that way. I would say that science cannot forbid a resurrection, because you see, science proceeds on discovering the regularities to which nature works and has done a very impressive job. And the fact that we know that dead bodies don't normally rise, that is a law of nature in that sense, means that we recognize something very special happened, if it did happen. Now, there are two issues here. The first of all, there's the in-principle one, which always ends up in talking about David Hume, who said that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. And I do not believe they are. That's point number one, and I can go into that if you like. Do you want me to?
Do you want to believe? Well, we might as well, since you raised it.
Well, you better define a miracle. I think a miracle is defined as something that is against the laws of nature.
But I don't define it like that at all. A miracle, miraculum in Latin simply means something to be wondered at, but we're talking about something supernatural. Now, it seems to be very clear that when Hume said miracles violate the laws of nature, he was really not understanding. And the great interpreter, Anthony Flew, of David Hume.
No.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think he was going to object to the raising of Anthony Flew.
Oh, well, I'll not raise Anthony
Let's
Flew.
get back to raising
He has
Jesus,
died and hasn't risen. I do, I do see that point. But the point is this. C.S. Lewis long ago told a little analogy. If I stay in a hotel tonight, put £100 in a drawer, and do the same tomorrow night, there are £200 in it. 1 + 1 = 2.
This is where it gets real, because Peter Atkins did not come here to be polite. He came here with a position, and he stated it flat out. The resurrection of Jesus? No evidence. None. And he didn't just say that as an opinion, he backed it with something that actually matters: science. Here's what people don't realize about this moment. Peter wasn't being dismissive for the sake of it. He was applying the exact same standard of evidence that we use for everything else we claim to know. When he said that science could go so far as saying it simply could not happen, when you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute. It's absurd. That is not an attack on faith. That is biology. That is chemistry. That is what we actually observe in the physical world every single time, without a single exception in recorded human history. And here is what blows my mind about John Lennox's response. He's a mathematician, a brilliant one, so you'd expect a precision argument. Instead, what we get is science cannot forbid a resurrection because science proceeds on discovering the regularities to which nature works. You have to understand what is actually happening there. John is essentially saying science only describes what normally happens, so it cannot rule out the abnormal, and on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But think about that logic for a second. If we accept that argument, we can never rule out anything ever, because any claim can hide behind the phrase, well, science only deals with regularities. That is not a defense of the resurrection. That is a way of making the resurrection permanently immune to investigation. And the moment a claim becomes immune to investigation, it stops being evidence and starts being assumption.
If on the third morning I find 50 quid, what do I say? That the laws of arithmetic have been broken or the laws of England? Clearly, I say the laws of England have been broken. How do I know? Because the laws of arithmetic have not been broken. It's our recognizing of what normally happens that helps us to see an exception. Now, if I were claiming that the body of Jesus rose from the dead by processes, natural processes going on in the grave 5 minutes before we happened, yes, that would be wrong. But I'm not claiming that. What Christians claim is that the God that created the universe and built the regularities into it is capable...
Pure speculation.
Well, wait a minute. No, this is
not worth listening.
This isn't speculation.
Well, let's listen and then you respond, Peter.
Peter, it's dead easy to say it's not worth listening to. You tempt me to say that about some of the things you say, but I'm not going to do that. Because it seems to me it's very important to listen to what Christianity claims before you judge it. And what is claimed is the God who creates the universe and sustains it is not subject to laws as if they were laws of a land. He set up the regularities and he can feed a new event into them. And the claim is, and with this I finish, that God raised Christ from the dead by an input of colossal power.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, you've got it, Peter, in one.
No, I mean, this
Well,
is...
that is the claim at the end of the day.
But, I mean, this is... everyone knows here that's nonsense. What you're inventing is an agent who can do anything he likes. He or she likes, I suppose you have to say these days. And so it is the laziest way of accounting for observations, sometimes observations that were never actually made. Religious explanations which resort to God did it are intellectually lazy. I won't use a stronger term than that, but I do think that they are lazy because, I mean, what does it mean as an explanation? You lie there saying, oh, God did it, and everyone says, oh, I understand now. Religious explanations are easy to accept by the unthinking. Science is difficult to accept because it involves a lot of thought. You really have to tease out the processes by which an event occurs. You can't simply say, and God did it. You've got to go through, in biology, you you delve down into, if you like, the chemistry of the organism. In chemistry, you delve down into the physics of the underlying processes. And I accept maybe in physics, you have to delve down into the underlying mathematical fabric of whatever I mean by that. It's jolly hard work, and you've got to work on it. But it's more satisfying when you get to the end of an explanation than that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying, and abracadabra, God did it. I mean, that is intellectually corrupt.
Oh, this section. This is the one. Because Peter Atkins just handed us one of the most brutally honest critiques of religious reasoning you will ever hear in a formal academic debate setting. And I want to make sure you fully feel the weight of what just happened. John tried to use the C.S. Lewis Hotel analogy. If you put money in a drawer and it goes missing, you don't blame the laws of arithmetic. You blame someone who broke the laws of the land. His point being, a resurrection doesn't break natural law. It means someone more powerful intervened. It sounds clever at first, but Peter saw exactly what was happening, and he named it directly. When Peter said religious explanations which resort to God did it intellectually lazy, he wasn't being rude for entertainment. He was making a precise philosophical point that has been debated for centuries. You have to understand what intellectual laziness means in this context. It means you've reached a gap in your understanding, and instead of doing the work to fill that gap, you've inserted an agent, a being with unlimited power who by definition can explain anything. And here's why that matters. An explanation that can explain everything actually explains nothing. Because a real explanation has to be falsifiable, it has to be able to be wrong. And then Peter goes further. He walks you through what science actually demands. In biology, you go deeper into chemistry. In chemistry, you go deeper into physics. In physics, you go deeper into mathematics. Layer after layer of actual work. And then, the line that I think will stay with a lot of people, Peter called it that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying abracadabra. God did it, that is intellectually corrupt. Corrupt, not wrong, not misguided, corrupt. That word choice was deliberate, and it landed exactly the way he intended it to.
Okay.
But Peter, that's confusing two different kinds of explanations.
Yes, indeed.
If you were to say about a motor car, Henry Ford did it, and that's all you had to say, then I would agree with you. But the point is, as I sit here and read your books and explaining chemistry and all this kind of thing, I say this is wonderful. This is not contradicting the God explanation, because the God explanation is saying that you, as a chemist, only have a universe to study because God created it in the first place. But he's not competing. In fact, interestingly, and this has always been a bit of a mandate for me, the very early chapters of Genesis, God commands human beings to name the animals. He starts off taxonomy, which is the basic intellectual discipline. In other words, he said, you go and do science, and you'll find it utterly fascinating. So I think you're arguing at a straw God and not a straw man.
You don't know whether God was starting off science. He might have got so bored with his creation that he wanted to amuse them in some
Well,
way.
who's speculating now?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, okay.
I think any speculation that uses the word God is intellectually corrupt.
I mean,
But this is absurd.
There is no God.
Can I-
No, be quiet. There is not one jot of evidence for God.
Oh, I think there's a
Only in
lot of
lazy
evidence
minds
for
is there
God.
evidence for God.
Okay, so let me just to summarise.
Yes, please.
Lazy, corrupt, and any mention of God is simply going down that path. Why for you is that not the kind of lazy, corrupt explanations you're
Well,
talking about?
first of all, take science itself. Why am I passionate about science? Why do I believe science can be done? Well, because I believe that in some way the human mind in here has access to the natural world out there. Now, why do I believe that? And sometimes I ask my atheist friends, I've never asked Peter this, but so he's excused, but I have asked many of them. I said, what do you do science with? And they say and they're about to say mind when they realize it's not politically correct to say mind. They say my brain. And I say, tell me about your brain. And one man who's rather famous, he said to me, do you want the really short answer? I said, sure. My brain's the end product of a mindless, unguided process. So I looked at him and smiled and said, and you trust it? And then I asked this question, which I've asked many times. Suppose you knew your computer was the end product of a mindless, unguided process. Would you trust it? And I've always had the answer, no. And then I say, I see you have a problem.
Now here's where John Lennox does something genuinely interesting. And I want to be fair here because this is actually a smart move. He pivots completely, he stops defending the resurrection directly, and instead attacks the foundation of Peter's entire worldview. He goes after the atheist's ability to trust their own reasoning. John's argument is this. He says he asks atheist friends, what do you do science with? And they say, my brain. And then he asks, but what is your brain under your own worldview? And the answer under strict materialism is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And then John asks the question he clearly loves asking. Would you trust a computer you knew was built by a mindless, unguided process? And the audience always says no. Now I want to give this argument its full credit because it deserves it. Yeah, this is actually one of the oldest and most serious challenges in the philosophy of mind. And it goes back to thinkers like Charles Darwin himself, who privately worried that if our minds evolved purely for survival, why would we trust them to find truth rather than just usefulness? That is a real tension. It has a name, the evolutionary argument against naturalism. And serious philosophers have debated it for decades. But, and this is important, the argument has a significant problem. Just because a process is unguided does not mean it cannot produce reliable outputs. Evolution selects for survival, and in many environments, accurate perception of reality is what helps you survive. The brain that correctly identifies danger lives longer than the one that doesn't. So reliability can emerge from an unguided process through selection pressure alone. John's analogy of the computer is emotionally powerful, but a computer has no selection pressure. A brain in an evolving species does. Those are fundamentally different situations. And that is the gap in the argument that Peter never got the chance to fully address in this clip. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.